On a live stream. If you were on a minute ago earlier, you should have heard us say you can go ahead and log in join our stream, but post any questions that you may have at that time. So feel free to do that if you are on. I heard myself. Do you want to do this as a share to groups? Okay, just thought I'd ask. I need the numbers. We seriously need to figure out. Good spot. You make me real creeped out now, won't you? Probably just about 3 minutes. Especially on the Twitter, right? You said? Instagram, I'm sorry. No. You'll have to let me know if sound cuts, because I may not hear it on the streams. And if it does, we're just going to go with the computer's mic. Because like I said, right now, this should be pulling it on my lapel. But I'm sure my computer will kick back in, hopefully. Unless I need to move this one and actually check and make sure I didn't screw something up. Okay, yeah, we should be good. I just want to make sure I didn't mute myself again and kick us off the live stream. Again. So we'll start here in about another minute. So again, a chance for you to log in. If you do have any initial questions about planning for gardens and landscapes, you can go ahead and put that into the comments area. I keep calling it a chat area, but you can feel free to do that as we are preparing for the program. I don't care. You're 6 feet away from me, so I don't care. Good idea. Well, and so that it doesn't backfeed into the stream. Oh. Oh. Welcome everybody to this episode, I'll say, of our Facebook Live between Gabis Arboretum and Purdue Extension, Porter County. We are going to talk today about planting gardens and landscapes. My name is Nikky Witkowski. I am the Porter County Extension Educator. I work with the agricultural and natural resources as well as those who have horticulture questions as well. So a little background about Purdue Extension is that there is one in every county. So if you do feel free to have any questions, you can feel free to follow up with me Porter County Extension or the Lake County Extension office, or whatever county you are in and watching from, you actually can follow up with that county extension office to talk to an extension educator to get questions answered as well. So feel free to do that. And again, my name is Nikky Witkowski that is speaking for today. I've already said this, but just to make sure people feel free to ask questions. Today we're going to talk more about some of the basics of planting gardens and landscapes. We figured this was a good topic this time of the year because we all want to get out, but I don't know about you, but it's cold today. I guess it's not too bad today, and it's going to get a lot colder tomorrow. So a good time of the year to have some in-house projects that still revolve around your landscape. So landscape and garden. And a garden is I'm going to say today, include things like your fruits and vegetables as well. So do keep that in mind that, I will do references to some tips and tricks on those as well. The first thing that you really have to do when you are thinking about planning, and I'm going to actually say this first, but there can also be a second first that you could do. But the first thing to do is evaluate what do you have to work with and what's happening in your landscape. A great example of something I can point out that actually is happening to the landscape at my personal house, but is a great example again of why you need to always be continually evaluating your garden and your landscape is, you know how we had that ice storm in the area right around, New Year's Day that took out a lot of people's power, and it was a really nice thick covering of ice that was really beautiful on the trees. Well, unbeknownst to me until about 2 days later, because I didn't look at my landscape as good, and it's funny that my 9-year-old son pointed this out to me sooner than I even realized it. Granted, his window faced that, so I'm not surprised. Unbeknownst to me, we have a lovely evergreen tree line that lines our front yard, and while I only saw half of the line, he saw the other half of the line of it, where we have some white pine trees. Well, if you know anything about white pines, you know sometimes they're a little weak branched at times. It wound up turning out that on the east side of all of my white pine trees that were on that tree line, every branch on the east side snapped off during that ice storm. So that is pretty catastrophic damage to a tree. It lost basically half of its ability to make food for this coming year. Not only that, think about how unbalanced that tree probably feels now that there's so much weight on the west side of it that it basically makes it a riskier tree in that respect. Now, what we have to also respect of the situation is on the west side, where all the weight now is on that tree, are power lines. And actually, that's what started drawing attention to our evergreen line, was that for the first time in 4 years, the rest of the trees are arborvitaes in that tree line. Our arborvitaes were tipping the power lines, and they hadn't done that in 4 years of us living there. But what that also then proved to us is that they're actually a danger as well. So when we talk about planting a landscape, and I just said you got to know what you do have or don't have to work with, we had planned to leave those trees in there because we liked the evergreen front that it gave for our property and the barrier that it presented us. The problem is now the situation has changed. They are a danger to themselves, and they're a danger to basically our community, I'll say, or the people who live on our street, because if they were to go down in a storm, we're wiping out everybody's power on that street. So that has created a situation for my husband and I that will probably require us to actually remove the entire tree line. So again, when we're talking about planting, they cast a lot of shade. We had value to them. And now the problem is that now because they've become a risk, we will have to actually remove them and replace them. But because they had cast shade and shadows, we didn't have as many opportunities as what we do now have. So that's again why, one of the first steps of thinking about planning your landscape has got to be, what do I have to work with? But also assessing what you have to work with, along that same vine of thinking. So that like I said, goes across the front of our property. When our driveway comes in, down our driveway is lined by some maple trees. Now, I guess it shows that I am too much of a horticulturalist and or arborist type of a situation that early on I figured out that most of the trees in that tree line were silver maples. And I could also figure out that later on, after they moved there, they added one more maple on one side for whatever reason, don't know, because there's not a corresponding one on the other side because it's where the driveway actually comes to our house. But for whatever reason, they added a maple tree, and the horticulturist in me immediately noticed this one's not a silver maple, and I was pretty sure it was a red maple. And the fall proved true that it's a red maple. So when you come down our driveway, most of the leaves are, greenish when they're in the fall, or, whatever fall color they turn. But that one is flaming red. So never really, been a smart planning on that respect. That one is first off flaming red, while the others are green. And again, the size of it just doesn't mesh well. Well, the problem is on the silver maples, again, they're pretty large and pretty mature. So we know the one was added later because of the size difference on the two. But even more importantly, what we have been monitoring on our trees is that we think that there either could be a fungus infection that could take them out at any day if we're not careful. But secondly, we have seen dieback. We are unsure if the dieback is again related to the fungal or because when we look at the base, the roots are girdling the trees. So we know because the roots are wrapping around the trunk of the tree, it can be cutting off their circulation and killing them. Well, there's about 8 trees in that, tree-lined driveway, 4 on each side. I have been steadily for the last year watching one of the 3 maples has 3 trunks. I've steadily watched one of the 3 trunks die every year. So again, evaluating our property as a whole, we've been watching that. We knew that was a situation that we'd probably have to replant that line if we wanted longevity while we were there. So when we think again about planning and what you do and don't have, we've been evaluating these trees ever since we started and saying, well, we can't plant anything now because they're here, they're mature, and they're creating too much shade. But this does create us now an opportunity that while it will really, really stink for us to wipe out all these trees, because you're talking about 10 or 15 trees total that are on our tree line because the arbs are somewhat close together, you're talking we may be wiping out 10 or 15 trees, which will obviously drastically change our current landscape, but also provide us a blank slate for starting over. So that's a good and a bad thing. It gives us a blank slate for starting over, but it would have been nice to keep all these trees. But think about the shading aspect in that and how that's going to change the landscape plans that we would have had. We would have had to work more with shade plants with the tree lines there, and now we can work with sun plants. I hope that doesn't surprise anybody using those different terms as shade plants versus sun plants, because we do always talk about, certain plants like it to be sunny and certain like it to be shady. But that's something you have to keep in mind. Our landscape currently is mature. So we could have planted more shade plants because of where our plants were and spacing of it. Most of the plants we would have planted would have been in a more shady of a situation. But since we're now talking of having to take the whole lines out, we're going to be dealing with a full sun. Now, we plan to replant trees, which means the only thing that we can plant right now are trees or things that like the sun, because that's what we're going to have is full sun in our property. So again, this is part of the evaluating our landscape of what we currently have and what we have to work with. Now, I still really love things like ferns and maybe some hostas. We already have a few, but I really like some of the shade-loving plants and the characteristics they bring to a garden. But I can't plant them right now. I could plant them right now before I remove the trees. But if we remove those trees, we remove every bit of shade. And if I remove every bit of shade, and if I wanted to plant the ferns right now too, I can't. So that's another aspect of landscape planning you have to keep in mind is not only what do you have, but what are you phasing in? You probably never want to create a landscape all in one shot, because if you did, people call that like an instant landscape. And that's when certain plants get planted in places like a spruce tree 3 foot off your house. Well, we think about the landscape now, but we're not thinking about the landscape maybe up to 5 years down the road, but probably not. But we're not thinking 10, 15, 20 years down the road, how that landscape's going to change and how that little spruce now in 5, 10, 15 years, how that is going to change the landscape over time. So you really have to make sure you consider that. All right, so there is a question that I will go ahead and look at and read. I put a window box in. Last year receives morning sun, put begonia flowers, and didn't have to prune or deadhead all summer, which was great. Do you have any records that are easy to care for in a window box that, only receive morning sun? So I'm assuming in the window boxes, and again, that's a good point to bring up with the shading and landscape planning. Again, like I said, yeah, you've really got to match it to a situation. Morning sun is your shortest sun. So morning sun, again, keep in mind, is going to be all your east facing. For those of you who may need a directional component to this, that means that I'm going to guess these window boxes are obviously facing the east since they're saying morning sun. Now, yeah, if you're looking for morning sun plants, and because they're also in a window box, I've addressed this in other talks, but because somebody said a window box specifically, keep in mind, we are going to most likely talk about annuals only or something we plan to die over winter, because since that window box is in the air, it's going to get so cold during the wintertime, the roots won't survive unless you put the window boxes on the ground and make them have more ground contact. Then you might be able to plant a more perennial plant that would actually survive year to year, but that takes the effort of obviously, up and down, twice, well, I guess up once a year, down once a year. But anyways, recommendations I would have is, so first off, I'd recommend you, go to your local nursery and see what they do have in stock. You said you've been using begonias. You can get some really good impatiens that also work good. Some other, one of my other favorites is Dusty Millers. They have a whitish hue to them. Things like that are also really, really good that you can experiment with. I would encourage you that you could even try some of like the vining, like the sweet potato vines and some of those as well. You may have to look for a more green leaf one rather than, don't go after the purple leaves. Some of those purple leaf ones, or if a leaf is a different color than green, keep in mind that sometimes, not always, sometimes that means they're going to be that color in more full sun because they're healthier and can have that color. So yeah, I'm not as up to date on all of my, I'll say, annual shade plants. But again, like I said, look for things like Dusty, I call them Dusty Miller. I think it's like Cincinnario or something like that for their Latin name. But again, a nice plant that gives off a reverse white color. There are also coleuses, I believe, that have a shade preference as well. And you can get those in all shapes, size, colors. They're really a cool plant, I think, when you really do investigate them. They do have some. Now, watch on those. They like to get big. So you may have to occasionally prune them back and kind of tame them down a little bit, or they'll cover your entire window. All right, so hopefully that gave you some ideas. So, kind of get back into the landscape plan though as a whole. And again, like I said, that even Side Trail pointed out some good points about the shading and options. So again, we need to consider our landscape, what we have to work with, including our house and windows and things like that we want to see. But then you also have to consider, well, what do I want in my garden? What do I want to be able to do in it realistically now? Yeah, I'd love to have a nice little garden trail and like you go to the gardens and things like that. I'd love to have something like that at my house. Realistically, I don't have the time to maintain it right now. That would have to be something that works into my landscape over time, not now. So keep that in mind, that you have to have realistic plans of what you can do. Now I'm going to go back to the other thing that I said earlier about how, hey, phase it in. I could have a nice garden trail going through my property, but I have to phase it in because most of those garden trails have an understory plant that when you look at it, it actually will have both sun and shade plants worked in. And I already mentioned how you're not going to get those shade plants worked in until there is basically shade. So keep that in mind in your planning. And then make sure, you're investigating, some of these plant options. So I see that, we're getting some more questions about what are some great plants to consider for sun versus shade. I will point out that Purdue does have some great resources. Actually, if you do Google, Purdue landscape and shade versus Purdue landscape sun plants, we do have some great resources out there. Or I guess I can plug, there's another resource that I know of. Granted, I'm going to say this one deals a little bit more with native plants, which to some is great and to some is not. But another great resource can be what we call a blue thumb guide. It actually talks more again about rain gardens, but rain gardens are basically using native plants that can take on water when needed. So, that does become a good option. So like, for example, a flowering vine doing mostly well in shade. I don't have very many great, knowledge of those off the top of my head, but that might be something that you can consider, especially when you're talking vining. That's what gets me, is I know a lot of vines that are shady, but I can't think of, honestly, one right now that is good shady, but doesn't have, I'm sorry, it's can vine and can flower, but not good in shade, or, one characteristics I'm not going to have blown out. So that is something I'd have to follow back up on. But when you're also talking about, things like, what type of trees or evergreens do well in full sun that I might recommend. So obviously one thing that I've mentioned is we, at my house, we have arborvitaes. I think an arborvitae is great when it is planted in the right place and you understand it and you monitor them. So the only major problem you're going to have with an arborvitae, well, first off, it seems like there's always a jinx that if you plant 10 of them, you're never going to have all 10 survive, first off. There's a jinx, so make sure you kind of overplant a little or plan to get a replacement within a short period of time, meaning 1 to 2 years, short period of time, because there's always a jinx. Not all of them are going to survive. And bagworms are the worst thing for them, but otherwise they're nice, they're soft, so that if you go to mow near them, you don't get pricked by them. I do like other evergreens like white pine. It can be a very nice tree. Just again, like I said, I've had a personal experience right now that sometimes, in a bad storm, they can be a little weak wooded and break. But otherwise, they are a great option for an evergreen tree. You can also look at things like spruces and firs. The only spruce that I would steer you away from at this time would be a blue spruce. A lot of people love them due to their coloration. The problem we're starting to find out worse and worse right now, though, is a blue spruce can get a certain disease that can wipe it out, or they get stressed and then they get a different but similar disease and it still causes them stress, and they are just not very long lived right now in our landscapes. So that's the only one I would tell you to avoid. I might encourage you to actually plant a mixed line of like spruces and firs. Think about it. If you mix it now and something happens later, you can add back in some other variety later and you don't lose a whole tree line due to an insect or disease. Just make sure they're comparable. So I like my arbs because they're very tall and erect. But the prior owner put spruces and firs mixed in. But they grow Christmas tree shaped, triangular, wide at the base, narrow at the top. So the end, result of this is just a really awkward tree line, because when I go to manage it or we go to maintain it, we're like going straight and then whoop, got to go around this tree, then go straight, whoop, go around this tree. Or what also happened is that because it was white pines and arborvitaes, they actually fought with each other and the white pines won. So like right now, our problem is, I said, our white pines got destroyed. Well, the problem is the white pines in that line hurt the arborvitaes so bad because they're so thick and they got so wide compared to the arbs that if we were to take just the white pine out, the arborvitaes will look non-existent. They couldn't grow in as full as they did on the other side when they did not have the white pines to compete with. So it just looks very awkward. So I would encourage, don't plant a monoculture. Don't plant all white pine, all white spruce, all, balsam fir. Don't plant all of the same. Plant a mixture to start with, and then that way if something comes in as a problem, okay, fine, we rip out all those trees, but then we can insert in something new instead of removing all the trees and having to replace all the trees again. So don't just go with a straight line of anything. If you don't need the line to be as tall, you can look at some great evergreens, including things like, boxwoods or hollies are a great opportunity as well that we don't always think about. And hollies, in the Ilex family, I-L-E-X, Ilex, that's where all the hollies are. Realize there are different hollies, because when I think of hollies, I think ouch, because I usually think of their spiky leaves because of, how in some of like the wreaths and stuff, that's what they have, the characteristically spiky leaves. But not all hollies have that. You can get other hollies that still may also produce berries, but their leaves are not going to be spiky. they're not going to hurt. So you will have that soft appearance. Now, granted, if you want it to be a barrier, then by all means get something spiky. You know, growing up, I always thought it was funny that my dad had gotten a mixed bag of lines that was supposed to help create a hedgerow between us and the neighbors. Well, I thought it was funny because I guess I didn't catch on to this. I must have been the one out trick-or-treating at that time. But I didn't always catch on to this until later, that my parents said what they would always have the most fun doing is, you know, trick-or-treaters, and they went the fastest way between point A to point B. And I guess trick-or-treaters would try to go between our house and one of the neighbor's house through the hedge line, because us kids found a way to get through it. So there was a somewhat path through, but the trick of the matter is we knew the trick. We knew there were thorns on those trees, and we knew how to dodge the thorns. But these other trick-or-treaters that only came once a year did not know how to dodge the thorns. And so then my parents would hear this, ouch, 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 as they're screaming, trying to get through the tree line because they got hurt. So that is something that you could think about in your tree line is, do you need security or do you need, I'm going to call it safety. You know, I didn't want to plant anything thorny right now in our yards because I'm just like, oh, I don't want to have to pull thorns out of my kids' hands and feet, you know, or, you know, whatever they brushed up into. But maybe that's something you want. You know, I'd heard an instance how some of my master gardeners worked with some Habitat for Humanity homes, and at first the homeowner didn't want certain shrubs planted in front of their house. Well, the shrub, which is now you can't get as much anymore, but there are similar ones you could look into like it. This certain shrub actually had thorns, and you didn't necessarily know about it until you tangled with it. But I guess one day somebody tried to break into their house, and this shrub was under the window, and in a failed attempt to break in, the person fell on the shrub and had to have gotten hurt big time, because that, you know, even just dealing with that shrub at all, it hurts sometimes to prune it. You know, landscapers don't always like it because it hurts, but they prune it anyways because it needs to be pruned. They just know how to work with it. But that's a good point, that our landscape can work with us and have security and safety, as well as against us if we're not careful, that I might have to pull thorns out of my kids, or do I really want to prune that thing because it's spiky? So keep that in mind when you're looking at that. So I hope I've answered some of the questions about some trees and some options of things that you can consider. I guess I didn't say any good trees, and the problem is a good tree, it just really depends what you like in it. I like the tulip tree, which is the state tree of Indiana, because if you actually look at it, I'm pretty sure it's somewhere between April to May, it actually has a tulip flower it makes. And it's huge. You know, I could about fit it in my hand. It's just a little smaller than that. But when they get mature, they have yellow to orange tulip flowers that they actually do kind of make in the tree. So they're really pretty. Takes a while to get there. They're slightly finicky, but not too bad. You just got to make sure you have them planted in the right soil and stuff like that as well. But I like tulip trees. Basswoods, I think, are a nice tree. There's some different varieties of those, of a basswood or a little leaf linden that's very similar, but it has smaller leaves and stuff. You know, I think they're kind of cool and interesting as well. But you can always go with things like your oaks and chestnuts, or make sure they're chestnut blight resistant, but your oaks and your hickories. Just research about that tree and what you do or don't want. Oaks are nice because they draw wildlife. Oaks stink because of the oaks, acorns, they eventually drop. So you have to make sure you're matching a tree with what you actually want to have in your landscape. Now, granted, keep in mind, if you're thinking about this as something lining your yard, remember when I first got on, I pointed out I have power line issues. So make sure that whatever tree you're planning to plant or shrub, the height needs to be 7 feet away from the lowest the power lines go, is I believe about a standard most like to go by, and 7 feet away on the east-west, or I'm sorry, horizontally and vertically, basically draw a 7-foot bubble around your power lines. So make sure that you're not just looking around when you go to plant the tree, you need to look up. And also know underground, like if you're planting directly over like power lines, you know, call 811 if you're gonna do that. But make sure you're also not planting over like your water lines and things like that, or gas lines, that's the word I was looking for. But make sure you're off. So make sure you research if the tree could get 20 foot wide, that means from trunk out, it's 10 foot. which means if your power line is, you need to be then 17 feet off your power line because you need that 7 foot away, and if it can get 10 foot wide, that's where you come up with the 17 total feet away from your power lines. So keep that in mind when you do that. So there was a question here about, sorry, I have to expand it a little bit. So there's a question here about, receiving bare root hydrangeas and whether to plant them now or not. So if you are thinking about designing and planting now, it probably would be better on all plants to not get them until, I'm going to say March or April. Granted, with that said, could you plant a tree right now? If you can get a shovel in the ground, why not? I'll say, you could, as long as they are hardened off, and I would hopefully assume they are. But if they were only kept in, like, I'll say a cool house where they aren't cold, it could be a harsh reality to them. But I'm also not going to say you can just dig a hole and put them in. It's going to take, if you're going to put them in the ground, you're going to have to be watering them because it's got a very bad root base right now. You're going to have to be mulching them. So you're going to have to put 3 inches plus mulch anywhere you dig up for that tree and keep it, protected. You may be, therefore, with that said, better off, kind of holding them over in your house. It'd be a technique they otherwise call heeling in, with, think heel of your foot, heeling in. You're probably better off with a quasi-heeling in technique where maybe in an unheated garage, or I think you mentioned a basement, keeping them there, putting them in maybe either some sort of a soil or get something like a peat moss mixture where basically, yes, their roots need to be covered and they have to stay moist or the roots will dry off. But do something like that to basically keep them overwintered well. Because again, like I said, you cannot have those roots get too cold. You don't want them to get too warm that they pop open either. That's why I recommend probably an unheated garage, because even in a basement, if it gets, too far above freezing for too long for them, like maybe even in the 40s and 50s, you're talking that they could try to pop dormancy. So that's where, again, an unheated shed or something like that, or an unheated garage may be a better option than in your basement so they don't break dormancy. But again, you have to be watering them. If they get too dry, they will still die. The other thing you can consider is kind of a way to both water them and, let them acclimate is, well, I guess, if we ever get good snowfall again. I don't remember, maybe, yeah, it is this weekend. They're talking about snow again. We'll see, because they forecasted like 2 inches one weekend, or so they had forecasted an inch one weekend and we got 2. And then last weekend, they forecasted somewhere between 1 to 4 and we got, well, okay, some of us just got a dusting, that's it. But if you ever get significant snowfall and you have those plants overwintered somewhere, I'll say outside, you can always take and flip snow on top of them and basically let the snow melt more naturally, water them over time so that way you don't have to water them. Now, granted, again, remember, I'm talking unheated garage or somewhere quasi-protected but not. So again, like I said, that's the main question is, are they hardened off enough that they can stay outside? Otherwise, I would recommend, and most people who do ship are going to try to wait for that time frame. But I'm not going to say everybody does. All right, I think I have gotten most of them in the chat unless you see something that I don't. So kind of going back to, planning of the landscape. So again, like I said, when we're thinking about planning, we've talked about we need to evaluate what we have and we need to evaluate what our realistic expectations are of what we can handle. If we want an outdoor cooking space, fine and great. Are you actually going to go outside and cook? That was the one thing I hated that my husband would pin me for at my old house is I wanted to go outside and landscape, but we were in such a mosquito haven area that I wouldn't go out during the summertime because I got bit by mosquitoes too easily. So he called me out on it, and I was like, I had to kind of give up that. Since I knew I wouldn't go out because I didn't like getting bit by mosquitoes, I had to find alternative gardening options that would work for us, that I could maintain. Because again, you will have to maintain it. There is no such thing as a maintenance-free garden. We can just control what we have to maintain. And we control that by looking at, well, how much water does it actually take? Is it going to be happy in this soil? At my old house, we had sandy soil. So I had to make sure I chose plants that didn't mind the sandiness of it and that they would dry out. Otherwise, I'd be watering constantly. In my new house, I have a more of a clay-based soil, so watering's not as much of a problem. It is, but it isn't. So I have to watch out, or you have to watch out for those things in your planning process of, can I realistically plant what I want to plant? Realistically, I wanted a bald cypress at my old house. Never going to happen. Never be able to have it watered enough. You know, at my new house, yeah, I could realistically plant a bald cypress because it could be wet enough. Heck, I've got a willow that's growing. Well, that's another long story. It's not growing anymore. But, you know, again, something to evaluate in your garden. So figure out what spaces you have and what you can maintain. Other dangers to worry about. You know, again, I mentioned, you know, calling 811, knowing where your power lines or where important things are in your garden. This can include, where is your septic field or, you know, your septic lines or sewer lines. Know where those are. So it is a misnomer that people say, oh, the tree roots found the lines. No, they don't like go sneaking around and try to figure out where they are. Trees and plants are smart. They put feeler roots out to see what's out there. If a root can't find something, they kill it off and let the others go. And if another one can't find it, they let that one go. And that's how they work. But if this root found something good, they're going to focus in that area and go towards that area. So what that should tell you actually is that if the tree root finds your lines, well, okay, either that means you have a leak or your septic field is working, that stuff is percolating down, and that you shouldn't have planted one on your septic field. But if you have a sewer line, that means, oh, they found a leak. Because, again, they can't necessarily break into it. They follow where the food and water is. That's all they can do because they can't move otherwise. But you need to be aware of that again so that you don't plant too many trees and roots around septic fields or mound systems for septic, so that way you don't have a problem with them plugging up your lines and basically ruin your septic system, because not only then would you need to, quote, kill the tree so that way you can actually get your septic going again, but now you have to redo your entire septic field. And now you're talking lots of money. So be aware of that. I have focused almost this whole time so far talking about your landscape, meaning I'm going to call it the frilly frou-frou stuff, you know, trees, shrubs, prettiness. Right now I want to pedal towards the fruit and veggie side because I'm talking about, again, what do you have and evaluating what you have. So again, everybody has some system to deal with sewer or septic on their property. If you're a sewer line, this next part isn't going to be as big of a deal, but it could be as big of a deal. It just depends if you have a problem. But if you especially have a septic where you either have a mound or a septic field, keep in mind you do not want your fruits and vegetables exposed to that stuff, I'll say, that goes in the septic field, because that presents a food safety hazard. So you can't grow and cultivate over your septic field. You shouldn't want to, but you can't, number one, because you could eventually get down to that level and destroy your septic fields. But also, like, we have a mound septic system and we have to clean a filter. Well, you should be cleaning the filter about, you know, every 6 months is what I hear. Ours is not that often. Ours is more often than that. Ours is like monthly. But point being, I have to think about, oh, we've got to clean this. And there for a short while, that thought did not dawn on me. And what I wound up doing is, if my filter system was right here, we actually put my vegetable garden right here. And it was basically level landscape line with where we were cleaning the septic filter, which basically I'll let you put one and one together of when we wash the septic filter out, it could easily go towards my garden. And we all know that that could not be a fun situation, because I believe you are not supposed to just wash it necessarily back into the tank. I could be totally wrong on that, but you're not going to get 100% of it back in the tank no matter what. So therefore you have that splattering everywhere. And do you really want that on, like, your tomatoes that you want to cut fresh and put on your sandwich? That's the thought you need to have in your mind, is, do I want that splattering on my food that I'm going to consume fresh, raw, uncooked? Now, granted, I actually grow the tomatoes for salsa, so mine's not going to be uncooked for the most part, but still, we need to keep that aspect in mind. When you also think about planning, what you should also be thinking about, like, if I'm going to have a vegetable garden, unlike what I said about the trees and shrubs and, maybe hopefully not having to water them. You're going to have to water, possibly fruits, but definitely vegetables. So make sure you're planning on how am I going to water them. Do I have a spigot off a house, a garage, a shop, a barn? Do I have a spigot? Do I have an irrigation line I can pull off of? Or am I going to just be dragging hoses? Because if you're just going to drag hoses, are you really going to drag hoses? Probably not. So, or you're going to leave them in the yard, and then you're going to run over them with a mower or something else and break them. So keep that in mind. You need a plan for all that you're going to do. So we need to make sure we're watching for that. So again, keep that in mind on the fruits and vegetables. So again, going back to the planning a little bit and thinking about what you're going to plant. When you're going to plant, you want to definitely plant things that are going to be your more hard aspects that, make hard edges first. So again, going back to your trees and shrubs, that is what we're going to focus on first to usually put some of that structure into place when you go to planting it. Then you start filling in with some of the other perennials and annuals that you might want to include in. So some other, I'm getting some other questions about, full sun, some other good disease-resistant flowers or shrubs and things like that. That would be good plants for starters. So, again, like I said, I do like arbs. I do like cedars. Just watch out how big they get. There is a lot of variety of viburnums out there. They are really, really nice as well because there's so much variety. Now, keep in mind, I'll just say this because I know this is a problem with some of them. There's fragrance, and there's either a good fragrance or a bad fragrance. We always think about the good fragrances, but not all plants give off a good fragrance. So keep that in mind when you're doing that. I do like yews because they regrow. The most common problem with yews are people don't realize how big they're supposed to get. I had yews at my old house that, they try to maintain like 5 of them the length of my house, which is like, I'll say like 4 car lengths. Well, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. 3 or 4 of my car lengths, which I'll explain why that's important in a minute. But they had like 5 of them that they were trying to maintain in front of my old house. Well, eventually they got tired of trying to maintain them, pulled them out and plopped them in 5 different places in my yard. Each yew now left alone and just, haphazardly planted, each yew alone is about 1 to 1.5 times the size of my car. So they try to restrain too much energy in a spot. So make sure that if it says 3-foot yew or 3-foot arb or 3-foot blah, 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 that might be the size it is now, not how big it's going to get. So keep that in mind. Other things that I like are Weigelias. It's W-I-E-G-E-L-A. Weigelias, how I pronounce it. That's the best thing that I can call it right now of a name. There's a lot of different ones out there that you can look at. And I like them because many varieties have a green leaf, but they actually have a really nice flower, and I've really not seen too many problems with them. There is a Weigelia that I'm pretty sure is being sold out there that if you need a small one, it's called a My Monet. On first look of it, you're going to either love it or hate it. It has a very mottled, multicolored leaf. It's nice because it stays small, but from the modeling of the leaf is how you're either going to instantly love it or instantly hate it. So be cognizant of that. But I love the little My Monet Weigelia. But I like Weigelias, period, because again, at one point of the year, they'll be like loaded with flowers, and I think they're really cool. The other ones that are straight green leaves, I can just tolerate them most times of the year, but when they're with flower on them, awesome. Another kind of unknown one that I have seen lately that I think is also really cool is one by the common name of a smoke bush. I cannot remember that one for the life of me's Latin name right now, but I think it's nice because it has, very true to its namesake, a kind of smoky flower that it kind of comes out and it's just kind of like wispy. And I don't always like wispy flowers if you know me, because I absolutely hate the flowers on coral bells. I hate those flowers because they're just so wispy. But I like this one's. And it has nice round leaves. And I don't know why, but some of those I just really like. They're really pretty. So that's another one that I like. But watch it on that one, smoke bush, because I have seen a couple examples of ones that should have behaved a certain way, and they didn't. They got bigger than they're supposed to get. So they were just apparently too happy. It's going to be my verdict on that, is they got too happy. Let's see. Oh, I had another good one for shrubs, and that one just eluded me right now. So we'll come back to it. But some other perennials to think about. You know, there's really a lot. You know, you can always go by your standby hostas. Lesser known ones that I like to see are peonies. You're going to have varieties that, yes, flop, but you just have a lot. But there's also what's called a peony tree. It goes back to a shrub. And it can get pretty flowers too, and it won't fall because it's actually a shrub. So it's not actually an herbaceous that dies to the ground. It's actually a shrub. So it's really cool. So I like peonies. I like good old standby columbines. Whether you get a native columbine, and be warned, its flowers are going to be small, or whether you get some of the hybridized ones that we have better maintained, I think a columbine flower is just spectacular. And they are also nice because after they flower, if they look a little pleh, you should actually be able to cut it back down to the ground, and it should actually re-leaf out for you and look pretty. A terrible name, but there's also some good, what they call tick seeds. So like tick, you know, the evil little insects, tick seeds, or they may be also called cosmos, or very similar. They're also called coreopsis. I'm pretty sure that's more the Latin name, coreopsis. I like those because most of them can seem pretty hardy. Tons of variety within them. Keep in mind, some of the cosmos you do have to watch out. Those could probably verge by that common name. They could verge annuals, not perennials. But I like them because there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of color. You know, you have some that have more strappy leaves, some have some more wide leaves. But they just provide a great variety for you in your lawn and landscape. So those are some, you know, good options I could say you could consider that are just different options that you may have, as well as consider things like, you know, the old timers of foxgloves, as well as, you know, I love always bulbs. You know, tulips aren't my thing. Make sure you watch for naturalizing tulips. You'll more likely have them year after year after year if they naturalize. And that is something to watch for, even on daffodils or all the other bulbs. If they say they're a naturalizer, you know you have a greater chance of them staying year after year after year after year after year. So, yeah, watch out for that. There's a comment here about, you know, well, I expected to have berries on certain elixes. You know, keep in mind that if we're looking for a certain quality on elixes, and I see that, you know, from the comments that, you know, may have never gotten berries. So keep in mind, again, landscapes, and I'm going to say because I'm not getting full history here, landscapes have to be grown into. So just like we're not, you know, for lack of better words, I'm going to say flat out, sexually mature as a baby. We're not sexually mature. Neither are trees and shrubs. So you may have to give any plant that you want a fruit on. We can have flowers maybe early on, but they may not fruit well till later. So you may have to give it 3, 4, 5 years to actually finally get sexually mature and established enough in that spot to actually make berries. Now, some plants like the elixes that I did mention earlier, hollies, you do have to make sure you get male and female unless they have a grafted male and female in the same pot, which is how sometimes, I've heard a term for it, but there's a term for some of them that, like, in the naming of it, they basically indicate it's male and female together, and that's how they do it. They graft a male and female in the same pot, which means some part of it is never going to flower because it's the male part. So if you have issues with the flowering and the fruiting of those, things to keep in mind is that, you know, it sounds like a ratio was not bad of 1 in 4 male versus female is not a bad ratio. Think about the placement of them, though. I've known of a location where they planted like a long line of females and like a spot here of the males. And that line goes on 2 sides of the building. And the females, though, again, go the whole line, but the males are so sparsely placed that the ones the closest are going to fruit the best, but there's a second line of them on, like, you know, just down the way on the building because they have the entranceway, of course, they have to cut for. Well, on the other half of the entranceway, there's no males. And therefore, they kept questioning, why aren't we getting the berries or as many berries? And I'm like, because you're too far away from the boys. It does take both to work. If you are unsure if you still have a boy versus a girl, the basic recommendation I'd have is put both in again. So you have to find a way to have both. If you have trouble finding, I'll say one or the other, what you'd probably have to do is either special order a male. You may be able, and I don't know greatly, I'm going to say, I don't know greatly how they cross on hollies. Like, for example, an apple, you have to make sure you have the right ones to cross. I would have to look up or call, maybe a nursery or a garden center and ask them, well, I have this ilex variety. Can a male from a different ilex help to pollinate my females that I have? But I would either say, work directly with the garden center, see if they can special order it. Now is the time to talk to them because now they are putting their orders in. So now is when you would talk to them about it. So see if you can't get on their list and work with someone now to do it. They are still there. They are still working. Believe me, I've been working with a group of them. So talk to the nursery and garden centers now if this is a problem so that you can get it ordered. Or there are different mail order catalogs that you can look at and try to basically order it specifically yourself. If you need some of those resources, I do know that there used to be a university, and you can email me directly at Nikky. My first name, though, is spelled Nikky, and then at Purdue, like the university, Purdue, .edu. I can actually send you a link because it was either the university or something else that we do have that used to keep a pretty decent updated list of different garden catalogs or mail order catalogs of how to get the program or how to get the plants that you might want. So yeah, if you can't get it locally, then I would definitely encourage you, see if we can't do some online searching as well to find it. So yeah, watch out for that. All right. Okay. So I think I got all the questions and comments so far. So again, like I said, think about all these aspects in your planning process. We mentioned it a little bit, but I want to also especially emphasize, again, because like I said, I wanted to make sure to hit fruits and veggies a little bit too. Make sure when you are thinking about your fruits and veggies as well, you have to make sure you're keeping that sun position in your mind because our sun comes from the south. If my sun's coming, and I'm going to say this is south, it's just going to mess me up because it's actually north. But if my sun is coming from the south, and I put my tallest plants here, is my baby plant or my little plant here, like this is my corn, is my little, asparagus or my other, tomatoes going to get good sun? Of course not, because the corn is overshadowing, my shorter plants. So you need to make sure that you put taller plants on the north side of the garden, or if I were to tell you something, put it on the east side. I think I did that. Yeah, north. No, I didn't technically, but oh well. You want your taller plants on the east side of the garden, because remember earlier in this program I said that the east side actually gets the least amount of sun, because when you actually look at it, the sun I think actually peaks out, somewhere right before noon, and we actually have longer west days, and I'm not an astrologist, I ain't gonna try that. But yeah, the way the sun actually peaks, your worst sun is, usually going to be the north and east side. So plant your tallest plants for veggies on those areas of your garden. And just because I said corn, I want to make sure you realize that while most plants work good in rows, and while, yes, farmers plant corn in rows, don't plant your corn in a row. Plant it in a block. You have to block corn because it's wind pollinated. And if you have a northwest row and the wind only blows east and west, then you have no neighbors for it to pollinate. So always plant corn in a block. Always plant it like 4 or 5 rows wide, and then you can do rows, but it has to be 4 or 5 rows wide. You can't just do like a line of tomatoes. You need a block. And I love it when I do the dumb gardener thing. And even I did that myself one year and then kicked myself because it was supposed to be a cool purple sweet corn that I planted. And of course, the kernels are like, one here, one there, one here, one there, because I didn't follow my own advice of planting corn in a block. And keep in mind as well that, I was like, cool, sweet corn, purple sweet corn, to only find out that it turns to water purple, but when you cook it, it turns back to yellow. Oops. So I learned I should eat it fresh rather than, if I want it purple, rather than cooked, which is another fun lesson. But keep in mind, even in your vegetable garden, expand out. Why do we just plant sweet corn? Why don't we plant popcorn? Or why don't we plant ornamental, the ornamental corn that you have in the fall? Don't plant all the types in the same year because they can cross with each other and then they may not work as good. So your popcorn may not pop. It may actually have more of a sweet corn quality to it and it won't pop as well. Or your popcorn may not pop because it's more ornamental rather than popcorn. But keep in mind that you can do that stuff. And I wouldn't necessarily go, ooh, I've got popcorn on the shelf. I'm going to go plant my popcorn from my shelf. First of all, we don't know how long that seed has been there. It may no longer be any good. Secondly, in the process of making it the popcorn in a bag that you have, either through a heating or chilling or cleaning process, there's no guarantee that corn is viable. Just like I can't take a kernel of corn out of my canned corn or frozen corn. I can't take that kernel of corn and plant it in my garden and expect it to grow. Make sure you do try to find seed corn. You can try, just don't gamble on how successful it'll be the first time. So keep that in mind. And I do see that, I have told some of you, I'd have to get more information on that. I do see that Peyton has wonderfully put in some email addresses that you can follow us up with, like about the Elix Emmeline or the seed catalogs. There was some other comment earlier I know that I said I wasn't sure on. Feel free to go ahead and email either one of us at those, because if she gets it, she'll just forward it on to me, or we'll get it answered one way or another. So we're getting close to the end. So like I just want to quickly kind of review where we were and continue on with anything else. So we talked about in the beginning, the very first thing to think about in a landscape is, what do I have? Well, and what do I have that's worth saving? Because remember we talked about, I've had tree lines that have died this past year or will die. We will have to take them out because of the damage that they've sustained or could cause. So, what do we have? What do we have to work with that is still sustainable? What do I want is what I'm going to put next. What do I want, and what do I want that I can actually control and work with? One of the things I'm going to point out on that is looking back at my tree line where we're having to remove a tree line. I want to replace it. I want to replace it now. Well, but if the summer improves like I think COVID is saying it might improve, I know my family and I are thinking about a vacation if we improve in our society. And we're thinking of at least a week, if not more. Okay, if I plant a bunch of trees and if they need a bunch of water, who's going to water them? Who am I really going to convince to come out to my house and water, 20 to 30 trees? Not many people. So is this year a good year for that to be what I work on in my garden this year? Maybe not, but we'll see. Unless I put an irrigation system in. All right, so what do I have? What do I actually have to work with? What do I want? What I want to work with? And we also then start thinking about, what are some of those aspects of things like, the watering and the shading aspect of it, and where's my hose placement so that I can actually water it if needed. And we're working with those concepts. We purposely, and not purposely because we're running low on time, didn't talk about designing principles. So keep in mind, there's many different designing principles that we can also keep in mind. Like, for example, I don't know my audience today, and I've been talking a lot about home landscapes. What if this is a school garden? What if this is for a park? Or what if it's for a church? Do you realize the themes in there get endless? We can start talking about, for a school garden, let's plant a pizza garden or a spaghetti garden. We can start getting onto our parks and, about, well, let's do one of those either native habitats or a butterfly habitat or maybe a rain garden, and that can work for some of our other businesses and, groups of, well, I want to support this kind of a movement, so I want to plant an all native one. Or maybe also I work for a hospital or something, within that status, and I want a therapeutic garden. So maybe I want my garden to be able to use for a therapy purpose, where maybe it's a sensory garden, where we learn to basically kind of, in that garden, use our senses. We actually think about, how do I de-stress and unwind? Because a part of that garden, maybe close your eyes and sit and listen. What do you hear? Maybe it's a hummingbird. Maybe you just hear the wind. Maybe it's just blowing. So I'm using my hearing. And then you can pause and make, well, what do you smell? And we can see, can I smell the flowers? Do they smell good or bad? Maybe I smell animals. I don't know. Maybe a skunk visited by. And I can go smell different things. We can also incorporate our taste. What do I taste? Maybe I'm going to put herbs in. Maybe I'm going to put veggies in. I don't know. That's a different one. But, most of those sensories, they're going to plant something that you can taste, potentially. And then keep in mind also, if you're going to do that, don't ever treat it if you don't know who's going to walk by and taste, unless you're going to put signage out that you had to, spray for bugs. So what can I taste? But then you can also make it sensory of what can I feel. So different plants are going to have different textures. We've already mentioned today hollies, and some of those, ouch. But you can also have some of those with a very fine textured leaf that are going to feel differently. Or some plants, like the dusty millers, are going to have a fuzzy, soft coating. Some of them are going to be more slick. Some are going to have a more of a rough leaf. So we can feel different things of the garden. Obviously, probably not having too many ouchies of the garden, but we can evolve that. And then obviously we can evolve our seeing. What do we see? How can we play with putting together plants that are visually interesting by putting a very intricate leaf versus, again, a big flat like hosta leaf. So I could have a fern and hostas mixed together to add intricacies and details that when I really sit there and stare at it, I'm like, wait, they're mixed. They're really cool. And I can see that textural, and I can see these little aspects of it. Or maybe there's a toad lily or something like that in there, and I am not kidding. There is such a thing called a toad lily. There's your homework. Go look up toad lily. But maybe I put, something in here that if you were to just walk past it, you're not going to see it. But when you actually sit and meditate and, calm your body and actually take time to look at the garden, you'll see it. During a program once, I pulled kind of a training option where what are you seeing? Write everything down. And then I said, okay, now we're going to watch another video. And I want you to write everything, just like the first time. And it was a short video, 30 seconds to a minute. And I said, all right, I wanted you to take, during this video, I want you to write everything down. And I said, now we're all going to be quiet during both videos. Well, what was hilarious, every time I tried to do this program, see anything. It would be the very first comment on the second video, because guess what? I blacked out the video. I blacked it out so they couldn't see anything. But what I had to make sure worked beforehand was my sound. And so then I made them listen to it. And I would just do this whenever they'd be like, no. And then they finally realized the point. They started actually listening and realized there was sound. And then I said, okay, what was the same? And they're like, what do you mean what was the same? And I said, you didn't listen the first time. I said, those were the two exact same videos. I said, you didn't listen the first time. I said, they were the exact same, because when I also got him to be quiet, it was actually humorous, because I was trying to do this video while I actually had my young son on my hip walking through part of my yard. And, I must have had my young daughter, because at the very end of the first video, what you hear is my son yelling, Mom, Mom. And so that's when that was my cue to shut off the video. But some people caught that in the first video. More people caught it in the second. And because some caught it in the first, they were like, oh, it was the same. But again, we forget to do that. So we forget to listen and have those sensory aspects in our garden. Now, I just talked a long time about different types of it and how we can think about that. And maybe that now made you also think of, ooh, what sensory things should I put in my garden? Because again, we forget about it. People may say, well, why don't flowers smell anymore? Because we got too busy looking and not taking time to stop and smell the roses. I hope you enjoyed today's program. Again, if you do have any other questions or things you would like elaborated on, the email addresses are there for you to email either one of us. And again, my name is Nikky Witkowski with Purdue Extension, and I thank you for joining us today.